Well, officially, we will launch this study in a global economy. I would like to invite you all to watch our first panel of the day, the global bioeconomy, what it is and how it would be financial. I would like to invite the director of the Department of Society, Maria, and as a panelist, I would like to invite the founder of the World Forum of Bioeconomy, Jukka Kantola. Would like to also invite the co-founders, Simon Zion. Thank you for being here and welcome to our stage.
Okay, now it's working. Um, Good morning, everybody. We are going to have this panel in English to facilitate the conversation. If anybody doesn't understand English, we do have translation here available. Okay? So it's a pleasure to be here with our co-authors of such a long trip to prepare the report. I make Karen's words mine. It has been a long way to a very successful outcome yesterday. And particularly I want to say, Marcelo, you were a huge driver of many of the organizations that are here together to keep pushing for that. And I'm really happy that, as Karen said, finally, we have principles agreed by the G20 and recognition of the importance of bioeconomy. So that's a huge opportunity for us here. And now today we are going to start today with this wonderful panel to give us a bit of this gist of what were we proposing in particular with regards to what are the opportunities of the stream of bioeconomy, looking at it in different perspectives, social, innovation, finance, but also a bit trying to look at what the report tries to do as well is how can we scale it? What are the challenges and the opportunities for us to finance it and to unlock actually bioeconomy? So I would like to start giving the floor to Jukka to give us a bit of an overview of what was the ideas we had around the bioeconomy in the paper, and then we'll turn to Simon.
Thank you, Maria, and I'm very pleased to be here. Bom dia, here in Rio de Janeiro, Cidade Maravilhosa. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Sorry, my bad pronunciation, but as you heard, I'm from Finland, or shall I say Funland nowadays, because you know Finland has been selected to get 6 times in a row the most happiest country in the world. So I have made a proposal to our government that instead of saying Finland, we should name that as Funland. But here we go. Okay, indeed, my name is Jukka Kantola, and I'm the founder and CEO of the World Bioeconomy Forum. And at the same time, I'm also the chair of the World Bioeconomy Association. Yeah, as Maria said, it has been quite a journey on this financing the bioeconomy report, and we are very, very pleased to announce it today. Hopefully you have had the time to have a look on that, about the content of it. We did not do that alone. I think that because they are watching us, we need to make some acknowledgement to the people behind of this report. It's a long list, but I like to point out a few of them. So there was Dr. Christian Paterman, Dr. David Brand, Dr. Michael Brandkamp, Dr. Rocio Adias Chavez, Chapel Appel, Dr. Jay Golden, Dr. Flora Ismail Dipacharva, Gustavo Martins, and a lot more. And with the surely exceptional project management editor support from Atulja Puroshothaman and Tam Moilanen. So thanks for you. But what I'm going to tell here is about what is the landscape of the bioeconomy? How does it look like today? And what about the global trends? So how the bioeconomy is engaged within these global trends, and what's the contribution of the bioeconomy on this all? Then how is the sustainable financing today? how do we see it, and then we are moving along more towards this heavy part of the discussion, so I leave that to Simon. And then about the international collaboration. I think it's okay, I should have here some slides. Let me see. Can you maybe put on my slides? Not? Oh. And this is the next one.
You could do mine.
Ow. Yeah.
No,
Okay.
it's not. It's not the presentation. Ah, okay.
If you go further down.
That'll save me presenting.
You get an idea.
You were quick today, Simon. Back, yeah. Okay, nevertheless, while we are seeking on this, that okay, what I was about to talk is about concept of the bioeconomy. So, how do we see what's the content? And I think that, okay, it has been very high on agenda, certainly here within the G20 meetings, as we also very much support the outcome. So, congratulations to this marvelous work what has been done and conducted by the Brazil government. So this is the concept of bioeconomy, very shortly. But this is only reminding that we need to balance between these different visions on the bioeconomy, and these are not excluding each other. They are more or less overlapping within each other. So first of all, you might have this pretty traditional thinking of the bioeconomy, and then we are talking about bioresource vision, which means that you are having resources at your disposal, and your focus is that how do you cultivate that into various type of application. Then you might have a biotechnology vision, which means that you are deploying the biotechnology as a tool for all type of conversions. And good thing with that is that, okay, it is untapping you or releasing you. You are not anymore depending on the nature or biological resources, because you can use also CO2 from the atmosphere. So this is then, okay, reducing our dependence on nature. So in that respect, it's worthwhile to take it that as a separate vision. And then finally, the balancing fact that, okay, you need to deal with the nature. The bioecology vision means that, okay, you leave the nature intact, and you are not extracting there any of the resources, and so you need to balance between these, so all these socio-economical aspects. So that has been our proposal, and and this is discussed also in the G20, and we will be proposing that also for the other international forums. Today there are some 24 national bioeconomy strategies, dedicated bioeconomy strategies. Next year there will be 25, because I heard that Brazil will come up with an own bioeconomy strategy. But it is showing that this bioeconomy is getting appreciated by the nations, and there are big powers like US, China, India, all do they have already bioeconomy strategies in place. What about the global trends? We are middle of this sort of transition, unfortunately, for the polarization. This is posing more challenge on all type of collaboration that we are facing, and it goes along also within the bioeconomy. On the other hand, we are shifting from the third industrial revolution for the fourth industrial revolution, which is also named as a biorevolution. And I think we need to take lessons from the third industrial revolution in terms of the case standards, in terms of the norms, all these good things, what did happen within the digitalization. And now we are entering into a biorevolution, so it is not invented by us. If you have a look like World Economic Forum, if you have a look like China dialogue about the biorevolution, it's everywhere. Anyhow, it is affecting us. So in that respect, again, these high-level principles is very timely documentation to paving the way also to development in terms of the bioeconomy. When it comes to sustainable finance, how do we see it? This is a pretty simplified picture, but the history behind is 1970s. You do know that much better than me, but it has evolved and it has been accelerated, especially since 2010. And today, the value of the sustainable finance is about $6 trillion US dollar out of the all economical activities, which is about, according to IMF, it's about 100 trillion. So it's quite substantial. But if you go deeper in this sustainable financing, you cannot find there aspect of the bioeconomy. So in that respect, it's very, very important that we are then starting to talking about that, how the bioeconomy could contribute in the sustainable financing and vice versa. But Simon will tell more about these, the models, what we've been then creating. You will see these 3 domains as he will then talk later on his presentation. So even though we have these 3 visions, it's not that good in terms of finance and modeling. So that was the reason we ended up to proposing these 3 domains, which will be easier to operate within the bioeconomy domain. And finally, we would need certainly international collaboration. This is directly from the report. You can read that out. I'd like to only point out that these couple of points here that scaling the positive impact and mitigating risks. So no one can do that alone. We definitely need to have a collaboration in this space in order to develop this bioeconomy financing faster than the sustainable financing. We don't have time to wait on decades, as it was the case for the sustainable finance. We need to act now, and this act now is today. So with these words, I would like to hand over to Simon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So just to summarize here, I think some important notions of looking at the bioeconomy on different perspectives, but also needing to, as you were saying, think about how there is not only the urgency and the need for scaling this, but how we do that looking at the 3 aspects at the same time and the role of global cooperation. No? And now hoping that Simon can start his presentation. It's not working there.
So good morning. So as we're fixing the technology on the side, not a piece of bioeconomy, I assure you. Just to add my thanks, first of all. Somebody asked me this morning from the media, is it terribly important that one does bioeconomy in the G20? And I just want to address that question. Because it's not, is the bioeconomy important, but is what happened yesterday important, and in what way? And just to sort of make the observation, Sergio quite rightly says, the future is completely uncertain and there are too many tipping points really to predict anything. So, of course, you're absolutely right. But I would predict that in 5 years' time, the bioeconomy will be an international way of thinking about a sustainable economy, a more equitable economy, not delivered, not solved, but a way of thinking about economic strategies and policies and enterprise models, ways of financing, and the breakthrough will be what we've achieved here this year. So I do think the G20 framing is important, not just because what happens within a group of people that are sitting around a table for 15 hours a day, but is important because of the spillover effects that then kind of goes back to each of those capitals and is understood by markets as signaling where policies are going to go in the future. So let's not underestimate not just the celebration of high-level principles, and isn't it great that Brazil has delivered this under the G20 presidency, but really the potential that it has for moving forward. So I would add my congratulations to obviously the group of coalitions that we as NatureFinance have been very pleased to work with, but also very much the Brazilian government for the insight of taking this piece of work forward. My technology is fixed, so that means I can now actually get on with what I was going to say. So let me just sort of turn to that. my technology is not fixed. It's just a figment of my imagination. Okay, let me try once again. Okay. We're getting there finally. So the first question I've answered is, why is it important? What's just happened? The second question I just want to refer to is, why aren't we defining the bioeconomy? Like, what is this thing? And you'll find that the more expert people are in the bioeconomy, the more ambiguous they are in defining what it is. There's a sort of inverse relationship between expertise and clarity, excluding you, Jukka. And so, obviously, it's the use of biomass in the economy. That's kind of the starting point. But actually, it's the sustainable use of biomass in the economy. And actually, it's the sustainable use of biomass in the economy in a way that also addresses climate goals. And actually, it's the sustainable use of biomass in the economy that addresses climate goals and addresses social equity issues. So if you think of it as that stack, don't try to conceptualize it. It doesn't matter. But sort of think about it as that's kind of what it's about at core, and those are the objectives that we're trying to figure out how the bioeconomy can address. But to an investor, that's rubbish. It doesn't mean anything. And so in this piece of work, as Jukka said, we've split up the bioeconomy into several parts that become, let's say, more investor-friendly, more clear when one looks at it through a financing lens. And there's always a danger of playing this game, but I think it's proven to be quite helpful. So the green section, green of course, is the nature-intensive economy. So that's basic nature products, food, forestry, fisheries, oceans, and that's particularly in the context of Brazil, but also elsewhere, where we think about the socio-bioeconomy residing. So the forest economy and its variations, small-scale farming, and so on. And then the middle piece, the purple, as far as I can see, is sort of the advanced bioeconomy. So here you're still growing stuff, but you're adding technology to turn it into a different set of products. Think biofuels. Brazil, obviously, a leader in biofuels globally. Think biochemicals. We're still growing stuff using land, but we're translating nature's products with technology-enhanced approaches into products and services that are upscaled, higher value-added, different uses. You're flying planes, not eating soya, if I can sort of put it as simply as possible. That's that middle piece. And then the third piece on the right-hand side is kind of up in the technology sky. When you think of who was around the table yesterday in the G20 initiative on the bioeconomy, it's interesting. Germany was represented by the Ministry of Agriculture, so that's a lot of that green stuff. But China was represented by the high-tech department of the National Development Reform Commission, all about biotechnology, upscale, biopharmaceuticals, biogenetics, much more sophisticated technological plays. And so these are not perfect categories, but they're useful ways of separating out bits of the bioeconomy, and they're really important when we begin to think about financing. So you can't think about how to finance a small farmer in the Amazon in the same way that you think about how to finance a global biopharmaceutical company. Obviously, these are two completely different beasts. What makes them the same is that they're all using biodiversity. That's why we're interested in the way they connect together. They're all drawing from the same core biodiversity resources, which means we need to ensure that they're accounting for the nature that they're using, that it's being priced correctly, that they're not depleting it and damaging it, and so on. So that's what connects the small farmer from the biopharmaceutical company. But from a financing point of view, there are a very different set of challenges. And so we've mapped out quite carefully, but only at a landscape level, some of the different financing challenges that relate to the first type, the second type, like biofuels, and the top end. And they're very different kinds of problems to do with sometimes the nature of the enterprises, sometimes the long payback periods, sometimes the complex technologies that have to be developed, sometimes the fact that the world is full of completely perverse environmental and fossil fuel subsidies that make bioproducts unprofitable in markets, that you're fighting against a sort of fossil fuel subsidized set of products and services that you're competing with. So a very different set of financing challenges that we've tried to map out. And of course, this is not about the world in the sense that financing challenges are different in different places. You know, if you're trying to raise money for biopharmaceutical research in Switzerland, you know, you're going to be lending at 2-3%, borrowing at 2-3%. Yeah, if you're trying to raise it here from BNDES, maybe you're raising it at 6%. Yeah, if you try and raise it in Zimbabwe, in Southern Africa, you know, you're raising it at 25%. Yeah, and obviously that's a very simple example, but it's just to make the observation that location counts when we think about the bioeconomy, not just because there are different biodiversity resources in different parts of the world, but because there are different sets of financing challenges depending on where you are and what you're trying to do. So we've again tried to distinguish particularly between low and middle income countries and the challenges that they have as compared, for example, with wealthier countries that have more sophisticated financial markets and often a lower cost of capital. And the good news is that there are many innovative financing mechanisms right across the chain of the bioeconomy. And actually, almost none of them are called bioeconomy funding. Yeah, and Jukka has also already made the point that in the last 10 years, we've brought sustainability into the financing world. And so financing the bioeconomy, we don't have to reinvent a lot of things in the financial economy. We have to think about how that decade of innovation can be repurposed to financing many parts of the bioeconomy that at the moment are challenged for some of the reasons I've just imagined. So we don't have to leave the room going, we have to invent bioeconomy financing. That's a sort of misconception of what the challenge is moving forward. We have to use much of the innovation that we've developed over the last decade in the public sector and the private sector and apply it to the bioeconomy development needs going forward. You'll be pleased to hear I'm not going to go through this slide, but it's just to make the observation, you know, on the left-hand side, you've got a lot of fairly traditional financing mechanisms, and actually, they're all relevant. If you're sitting in Kenya today and you're pushing a startup to use new sets of invasive species, you know, as ways of building buildings, yeah, that instead of it being a problem, you're trying to translate new forms of biomass into new products and services, what you may need is venture capital. Yeah, and venture capital, frankly, in East Africa is not easy to find. Yeah, but you know, it's something we know a lot about, venture capital. Again, we don't have to reinvent it. And then on the right-hand side, you've got what we think about as sort of accelerator financing mechanisms. So these are innovative financial instruments. We have somewhere, Aaron, are you around here somewhere? Just stick your hand up. No, he's lurking somewhere. Oh, he's over there. Right, so one of my colleagues who's come in to the show today runs in NatureFinance a team focused on nature and climate performance-linked financing instruments. So he's over there, absolutely. I can point to him again. Right. Oh, he's still over there. He hasn't left yet. And what does that mean? So you get an investment. The cost of capital is X. You define some key performance indicators that have to do with positive nature or climate outcomes. And if you achieve those key performance indicators, cost of capital goes down. Yeah, very relevant in the bioeconomy space. So lots of sort of accelerator instruments that we can begin to deploy in this area quite effectively. I don't want you to leave the room thinking the problem's solved, but I do want you to leave the room thinking, actually, we have a lot here that we know about, but what we need to do is to focus its applications on this domain that we're really trying to build out right now. And then we get to, is it the good news or the bad news? It depends on how you look at it. So simply finding ways to invest in individual bioeconomy companies isn't going to work, because you need a broader enabling environment in order to build an ecosystem of actors. You know, many bioeconomy companies, particularly where it involves technology, needs research establishments that they're not going to fund but need to be there. It may need regulations. Yesterday, I'm about to make a terrible mistake, but yesterday the law that was passed in Congress, am I right, called the New Fuels Law. Now, yep, Marcelo is nodding, that's a good thing. You know, that is using policies and regulations to begin to create a new market in sustainable aviation fuel. Yeah, and that will incentivize investments in Brazil and elsewhere, hopefully over time. And that's an example, we would hope, of a smart policy and regulation to help build the markets that are offering profitable returns to bioeconomy products that make sustainable use of biomass. And we go up the stack on climate and people, as I described before. So we need a lot of smart policy making. And in some countries, that's relatively straightforward. And in a lot of countries, that's really difficult, because many governments, even with the best will in the world, don't know a lot about this topic, and they're not sensitized to how to bring the right policies and regulations and tax credits and incentives into play. That's why Jukka made the point, supporting the development of national development plans. You have an ecological transformation plan, so Brazil is in a good space in many ways, but many other countries are not, is going to be a really important thing moving this forward. So don't leave the room thinking this is about money for bioeconomy enterprises. It's also about building that broader ecosystem that includes policies, regulations, incentives, educational establishments, research, technology development, and so on. This is not a simple game, but it's certainly something that can be done. And that kind of encourages us, and again, I'm not going to go through the individual examples, you can look at the screen if you want. It encourages us to realize that the problem in part is exactly what I described about who was in the G20 meeting over the last few days. You need an integrated approach. This is not something for the Ministry of Agriculture alone. It's not something for the Department of Science and Technology alone. It's not something for the Department of Environment alone. It does require that you put some of these actors together, and those actors with the scientific community, with the financial community, with young entrepreneurial startup actors that see the opportunity of a new generation of businesses. We have to build more integrated approaches. And as you all know, that's really easy to say, and it's really difficult to do. But we don't have any choice if we want to develop this sector effectively. International cooperation, I think Jukka has already made the point. The principles are great, but we have to look at them as a starting point. The real question is not, you know, can we have another interesting set of conversations and consensus in the G20 South Africa next year? It's not, can we bring the work from the G20 into COP30 and show that the bioeconomy is important? We need to begin to get more granulated, particular sectors, particular types of enterprises, particular types of financing mechanisms. Some of that will happen in the market. Some of that will happen at a national or regional level. Some of it requires international cooperation. And we need to be clear that we're operating at all of those levels. And with that, I will thank you very much indeed for your time and patience, and pass back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. We can have questions, addressed here, but I will start with some to provoke both of you. Starting maybe with one concept at the very beginning of your presentation, Simon, but also relating to something Jukka said, is territories matter. So we're talking about different opportunities on bioeconomy, but clearly a financial strategy in Brazil, in Kenya, you were mentioning, or Switzerland can be very different. So I'd like to have a bit of your reflection of how do you see some of those different financial strategies according to different countries? And maybe for you, Jukka, also to think about, you were talking about this planning, and then different countries have their own already bioeconomy strategies. How do you see these differences and how to address that?
We're having fun. Yep, that works. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Maria. So imagine a situation in 10, 15 years' time, the bioeconomy is 30, 40% of the global economy. Yeah, there are blossoming and profitable sectors and businesses all over the world, and Brazil is supplying it with nature. Yeah, that you fail to move up the value chain, you fail to grasp some of the new opportunities. You're measuring nature very nicely. It's sustainable use of nature, but you're still a commodity exporter. That's the wrong answer. It's clearly the wrong answer. And it's an unlikely situation for Brazil, but it's a more likely situation for many other low and middle income countries. And so it isn't only a question of making sure that we're making sustainable use of biomass, but finding financing mechanisms that enable low and middle income countries to begin to move up the technology value chain as well and capture some of the economic value, livelihood opportunities associated with new bioeconomy sectors as they begin to emerge. It doesn't make the small-scale economy irrelevant, small farms irrelevant, not at all, but it is trying to take part in a broader part of the bioeconomy as it emerges. So that is the challenge, if you like. For many low and middle income countries, the role of blended financing instruments is going to be really important. And although you're facilitating, Maria, you might want to mention the nature-based solution work that you've been helping to Sherpa within another part of the G20, which is the Sustainable Finance Working Group, because it really illustrates how far we've got in understanding how to blend public and private funds in order to support enterprise development or infrastructure investments in countries where the cost of capital is too high, or the markets are not well developed, or the regulatory environment is not as robust as it needs to be. So I think we know a lot about how to mobilize the right blend of public and private money to begin to support, I don't know whether I would call it leapfrogging, but certainly movements that both secure the quality and the sustainability of biodiversity, so that critical nature restoration and protection agenda, and deploy it in increasingly value-added areas. I think that's very different if you're a global pharmaceutical company sitting in Switzerland and you're looking at the use of biogenetics, which you're then going to synthesize anyway, so you'll have nothing to do with nature after that anyway, and then you've got a 15-year pipeline where you're using corporate balance sheets in order to finance long-term development of a new product suite that has a lot of IP control and a lot of potential rent-taking at the end, and tax credits provided by the Swiss government or the European community. I mean, that's a very different kind of world. But some of that, as countries move up the technology value chain, we also have to learn how to bring to low and middle income countries. So these are not really different worlds, and I think we can learn from all sides and can. I think it's attractive that BNDES and a few of the multilateral development banks, Inter-American Development Bank being the obvious case in point, but I think increasingly others as well are beginning to get their heads around the importance of the bioeconomy as a way of thinking about what they need to invest in and how they need to develop in countries. And I think, again, that can be advanced quite significantly next year in the context of the G20 and the COP30. Thank you.
Jukka, some thoughts?
Yeah, I almost forget the question because there was so no reply. But nevertheless, a few points about this. I think that when it comes to let's say differences in the strategies and what does it then, what kind of challenge it is posing for the financing mechanisms, I think that we just have to face the fact that there's no one-size-fits-all bioeconomy, and there are different emphases depending where you are when we have a look on recent announced bioeconomy strategies, I think the very latest was that actually the Japan bioeconomy strategy update, which was launched in June this year, and have a look at their way of thinking the bioeconomy. You can still analyze this through this three vision thinking. When you have a look on the Japan case, very much focusing on the biotechnology, they do have an emphasis in there. And then on the other hand, they are shifting towards bioresource vision. It's pretty obvious that also Japan, did you know they have a 2/3 of the country is forest covered. And now they have an intention in their strategy. They need to deploy that more into their sustainable usage, etc., and so forward. So that you can analyze these, you can recognize these differences. On the other hand, if you have a look on the Namibia case, Namibia announced their bioeconomy strategy. It was the case spring this year, and they do have also interest in the bioresource. How do you then cultivate it that further? They do have bioecology vision high on their agenda. So I think the name of the game is that through this sort of vision thinking, we could then sort of, let's say, bundle and getting these, let's say, phenomena more bigger, and that has been a challenge also for the financial world. How the heck you can then invest, because it's the bit and pieces every here and there, forget it. But now when you can then bundle these through these what do they contain, and then you are having, as Simon said, that we are not about reinventing the wheel, that how to apply these tools into the bioeconomy. And then these high-level principles, which was agreed yesterday, it's very, very historical document, because it is aligning again with the understanding of the bioeconomy. It's paving the way that it will be easier then to, let's say, adhere bioeconomy as a part of the sustainable finance.
Thank you so much. Provoking further here on some of the comments both of you made. Was thinking, like you mentioned about the blended finance. No, we did this work with CPI. I'm seeing them there. One of the things that come out of the paper, and I'll not spoil more because there will be some talks about that this afternoon, is that indeed, the role of public finance is very different from one case to the other. In particular, of course, if you go to some territories, for example, Africa will have much more bigger role to play from public than private, as if you go to US. No? So a big challenge is really this question on how to really unlock also scale. No? And you mentioned, Simon, policies, you were talking about the principles. What are really these things that we need to have in terms of scaling really bioeconomy? And probably, we can't find a solution for fit it all, given that the conditions of countries are different. But there could be ways to promote, for example, valuation, monetization, taxonomies, and ways to make it more kind of transparent and valuable, so that we can really unlock these investments. So I would like to provoke a bit this. What are these things that one could think globally, very pragmatically, that can unlock a bit this difficulty you have today of still a lot of the bioeconomy investments, particularly the social bioeconomy, but I think also some large opportunities. We're talking about the bioeconomy related technology, here in Brazil, biofuels, but also restoration and some large opportunities of scale. We see still a lot of those deals being seen almost as a project finance. Lots of barriers on the monetization, valuation, and so on. So I'd like to have a bit of reflections on how these principles, but also good practices in policies or global collaboration could help to unlock and understand better the opportunities. Want to start?
Sure. Do you want to go? Okay, it gets more boring here, though, I have to say. So in the organization I'm part of, NatureFinance, we talk about the NatureFinance operating system. Yeah, you can see we've stolen that from Apple. They'll probably sue us soon. And so what do we mean? So for all of this stuff, for any of this stuff to work in a scaled way, we have to understand how to measure and manage natural capital. Yeah. That there isn't consensus on how to measure the state of nature. Yeah, there are many different ways to do it, and that feeds into many different ways of building natural capital accounts. And then you've got to go further. How do you move those natural capital accounts, which is a science-based analysis, say, of the state of nature, to put it in simple terms, into a financial accounting mode? And how do you move that into balance sheets, so assets, not just financial flows? And how do you move that into asset valuation models, yeah, that can work in the financial sector? So you've got this sort of, I warned you it was boring. I can see people looking at their phones. You've got this underlying infrastructure that is needed to make any of this work in a consistent and scaled way. And if that only happens at a national, or even worse, at a local or project level, you've got some project or some financial institution making their own decisions about how to measure natural capital and how to translate that into balance sheet entries, then you've got chaos, absolute chaos. Yeah? And so international cooperation is needed to normalize, standardize, and make robust the way we understand how biomass is being used, what the state of biomass is, and how that's translating through this stack of different accounting systems up to investment decisions and enterprise decisions. You know, it's like what Rabobank is going to have to do 1,000 times a day. But you're not going to develop that natural accounting system. You need something that you can tap that everyone's going to use in the same way. Otherwise, it's going to be hopeless for you. And so things like the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure and the way central banks are coming into this area and beginning to build architectures, all of that upstream development is happening. It's tortuously slow, but it is happening. And it's not exciting, and it's absolutely required for any of these innovative financial instruments and all the interesting stuff in the real economy to really happen at scale. And I'll kind of leave it at that to start with.
Jukka?
Yeah, maybe I read this through the story. Why it is important that there's a global understanding of the bioeconomy. Our former prime ministers visited quite far away from Finland, going to New Zealand and going to Australia. And when they were meeting up, they were discussing, being far away from each other, but they were discussing, what we can do in order to improve the climate change mitigation, what we can do in order to improve the biodiversity. But both, like the New Zealand, a lot to do with the bioeconomy, Finland having to do with the bioeconomy, Australia having to do with the bioeconomy. They didn't talk about the bioeconomy because there's no global agenda on it. After yesterday, I would claim we will have a global agenda. And when we are talking about this kind of sort of global phenomena, it just needs to be sort of top-down approach that you could then adhere. Even the small nations like Finland can adhere to that, or New Zealand, within their own agenda. But if you don't have it, you don't have any reason to talk about that. So I would claim that it will only accelerate the development. So that's the importance that why we need to have these high-level principles, and we are very much supporting that within the World Bioeconomy Forum, because that's paving the way, the sort of comprehension, the bioeconomy. What do we mean by the finance? As Simon said, that there are instruments in place 2 years ago, 3 years ago, no one was talking about that. So I would claim that within the 2 years, since 2 years' time, especially after the pandemic, there have been great development within the bioeconomy, and we need to only accelerate this. And now it is also in the corridors of the World Bank or IMF they do have an understanding about that. World Bank was there yesterday. I don't know, I suppose I was also here today. But okay, the international multicultural governmental institutions are part of that, and they do have an understanding. So I think we can be very, very proud about that, what has been then accomplished, and now it's about the time to start to implement into this.
Thank you. Simon, one question for you on follow-up on the valuation, etc. You talked about the toolkit, right, of like having financial instruments and also enabling environments. I would like you to maybe just go a bit further with some examples or things that you think could be really unlocking, understanding that exactly you need to have like the perfect blend. No, I used to have a boss that had a whiskey bottle when we were presenting blended finance and saying, if the blend is bad, you also get a headache. No, so you need to have the perfect blend for specific needs. But it would be interesting to know what are things that you think could be also opportune to support this valuation monetization, and maybe give some examples of these toolkits.
I'm still thinking of the perfect blend and your headache, but I'll get that out of my head in a second. So again, let me just sort of give us a possible set of building blocks. You know, so you got this operating system that I talked about, then you got a bunch of financial instruments, yeah, and then you got the real economy somewhere up there, right? And somewhere you've got a whole lot of governance. Yeah, not just governance of the bioeconomy, but governance of the financial system. Yeah, and if you get the governance stuff wrong, you know, well, I don't want to make you miserable, but it will all go terribly wrong. So we need, you know, we're trying to fix several bits of the system in the same way and at the same time and as quickly as possible. So in the financial instrument space, the point I made originally is, you know, there are lots of financial instruments out there, and we've just got to learn how to use them in the context of the bioeconomy. And I think that's broadly right. But there are some developments that are more specific to biodiversity beginning to emerge. And that's largely to do with trying to, you know, get biodiversity conservation and restoration paid for, yeah, separately from, you know, should we be growing food or biofuels or other pieces of the story? And maybe... Wait. I'm not quite sure what that was, but just put that to one side. I think they send these things through when there's some... Anyway, we won't go there. Right, nobody else has went off, so it's probably okay. Something happening in Switzerland, which I should know about. Okay, so you know, most of you or all of you will know what carbon credits are and voluntary carbon markets that have sort of emerged. You know, in short, you know, that, you know, a company is emitting a ton of carbon. It wants to offset that ton of carbon as cheaply as possible. It goes to somewhere, perhaps in the nature space, where there is the sort of sequestration or the absorption of carbon that can be increased with some investments, and it pays some money for that to happen, gets a credit, it's offset, it's ton. Yeah, I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but kind of that's what voluntary carbon markets are. And as you probably know, they don't work terribly well. And so a similar set of markets is emerging in the biodiversity area, known as, not surprisingly, biodiversity credit markets. And in fact, there are some examples of developments happening in Brazil. I'm not terribly up to date. Some of them are happening at a state level. Some of them are being experimented with in the Rio city that we're sitting in now. There are others here, I'm sure, that can speak to those examples from here more effectively. But it's an experiment. It's an experiment, again, in developing a new set of financial type markets to channel funds into biodiversity restoration and conservation that has traditionally been paid for by philanthropy or the public purse. And there isn't enough philanthropy and there isn't enough public money. These biodiversity credit markets, as I say, are at an early stage of development. They're not the same as voluntary credit, as carbon markets. There are some important differences. And actually, this afternoon, I think we're having one of the sessions where we have Amelia Fawcett, who may already be in the room somewhere, who's the co-chair of the International Advisory Panel on Biodiversity Credits. So this organization is leading the way in trying to design some of the new international standards for the way in which these biodiversity credit markets might arise. So we'll have really some expertise in the room to have that conversation. So yes, we need to look at traditional instruments, lending, debt, and everything else. Yes, we need to look at the sort of now well-known understanding, sort of sustainable financing instruments. And yes, there are some new instruments emerging that are not necessarily investing in what we would normally call the bioeconomy, which is the productive real economy making goods and services that you buy, but are also finding new ways to invest directly into nature restoration and conservation. I think we need to think of that as part of the bioeconomy as a whole. Thank you.
I'm being told that we're almost time out because we're a bit late, but I would like to have a final provocation from you, also from some questions that came, which is, we have these principles, we have now an opportunity to move forward. I understand with top-down, as you're saying, that these principles are agreed among governments allowing this kind of collaboration, but how do you see from now on also really these driving processes that can improve collaboration between public and private sector? Because it's extremely important here that we're talking about bioeconomy, so that private sector is buying in. And how do you see going forward also that these push for more innovation and it's not just more of the same? You know, so for both of you, maybe start with Jukka this time,
Yeah.
and then we'll be starting closing here.
I think that first of all, that okay, these principles need to get explicit, need to be then published, need to be then that's the time when it's going to be happen. But nevertheless, that need to be then played out that also within the private sector. And we've been also talking about there are certain systems in place that that what could be then helpful, so engaging the ones who are already operating in this private sector. That for example, we are then planning now to bring the World Bioeconomy Forum here in Rio de Janeiro again, 12th and 13th of March. And that's really the case that we are then bringing also the private sector into this communication. What does it then mean for them to operate in this space? And even that is not enough. We need to also engage the societies, ordinary consumers, that they do have an understanding. What do we mean by bioeconomy? And in the beginning we were talking about, yeah, might be a bit complex matter, bioeconomy, yeah, certainly it is. But I would claim that also the climate change mitigation is even more complex. But still, if you have a lot of ordinary consumers, quite many of them do already recognize today what I should do, what are my everyday choices, that I'm protecting the global warming. Bioeconomy is not yet there, but I think that yesterday was the startup of that journey, that to communicating this message across also on the private sector through the companies and also with the societies. So it won't happen next year, year after that, but it will happen today, tomorrow. And my reading is that South Africa is also having an interest to carry on this communication about the bioeconomy, and the high-level principles are not necessarily, that's my interpretation, cast it in the stone. It's a good startup, that starting point, but that will evolve as we are moving forward, and hopefully then year after US is also taking that into their agenda. So these sort of things.
Thank you. Here. Simon, last words.
Briefly, thank you. So, hopefully this panel and the rest of the day, is exciting you, is informing you, maybe is boring you sometimes, but it also needs to worry you. Yeah, and I don't mean to end it on a depressing note, but maybe there is an observation to make. So every time when you walk down the road now, you hear the word the bioeconomy, you mustn't automatically think that's a good thing. Why? So the bioeconomy doesn't need to be encouraged in a sense. It's going to happen. This is going to happen. There's more and more bio enterprises, sectors, products, technologies. All of that is going to move and is going to move quickly. Our challenge is not just to make it move more, but to Razan's point when she was talking about finance, but to make it move in the right direction. It is perfectly possible that the bioeconomy evolves and does more damage to nature, does not support our climate goals, disempowers small farmers because the land is worth more to make other things. You know, it can go wrong. And so our task is not just to go rah-rah the bioeconomy, but to really focus on how to shape it in the right direction. And that's not a simple task. All of the things that we've been talking about on this panel, that we'll talk about on all the other panels and workshops this afternoon, are all bits of the story, not just of making the bioeconomy happen, but of making it happen in the right way. And we need to take that agenda seriously so that we don't fall foul of unintended consequences which are really not the direction we want to go in. And I don't mean to end it on a negative note at all. I think this is a fantastic agenda to take forward, but we need to keep focused on risks as well as opportunities as we begin to take this agenda forward. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much. And I think this was a wonderful panel. The challenges ahead, I think, on getting it on the right way are before us in many ways. We have in Brazil COP30 next year, but we also have a lot of other forums in addition to G20 and the COP30, and I think this is our way for reflection. For us Brazilians, we do have space for discussing ourselves and moving the agenda. Multilaterally, Brazil has many roles next year still also with BRICS Plus and other arenas. We have important also events like Finance for Development. I think we just need to, as you were saying, Simon, to be aware that biomass or the nature-based solutions are part of what we are looking as development patterns, and we need to take it more seriously and more forcefully in the conversations towards the future to understand what is this role specifically and how we make it right, as you were saying. So thank you very much. We have an exciting day with lots of other panels. Thank you for your patience. We were a bit late because of the late beginning, but I think we managed well with our timing. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you, Simon, Maria, and Jukka. Thank you for this. Okay, maybe we can have a family photo. Our photograph is over there.